Hey guys, what is up? My name is Landon and welcome to the Jersey Zone. So yesterday we got the massive news that Kyle Dubas will not be returning as the general manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs next season. Now there is a lot to talk about with this subject. First of all, how Kyle Dubas and the Toronto Maple Leafs parted ways and why I put that in quotations there, whether this was a good move or a bad move, the history of Kyle Dubas, and what the future holds as well. I'll put timestamps in the description down below if you guys want to check out just a specific topic there. Before we do get into it though, if you guys are new to the channel and you like hockey content, please make sure to subscribe. I really would appreciate it. The news first broke yesterday by a couple of reporters. I think it was like Chris Johnson and Elliot Freeman, I think were the two guys that came out with it first. And then obviously the Leafs officially announced it on their Twitter that they had parted ways with Kyle Dubas. Now, when I first saw that, I was a little bit surprised, but I also understood it a little bit, especially if you saw Kyle Dubas' press conference. I believe it was on Monday. He was pretty open and honest in that press conference, saying that he wasn't sure if he was going to return as the Leafs GM just because of how much of a toll this season took on his family, and that's completely understandable. He said that he wanted to kind of have a talk with his family before he fully decided, and that's great. I think that was perfectly fine. Going back to yesterday, then we got the Brendan Shanahan press conference, and that really changed the way that at least I looked at this situation, and I think a lot of other people as well. He kind of gave a timeline in that press conference there that really just made it seem quite different, and we'll talk about that timeline. We'll do a little bit of a shortened version of it. I recommend that you guys do check out that press conference though, because it is quite spicy. Like, even if you aren't a Leaf fan, it is pretty interesting. But yeah, we'll quickly go over the timeline here. So basically, a shortened version of what Shanahan said was at the start of the season, they approached Kyle Dubas and said that they weren't going to give him a contract right away, and they were basically going to evaluate this last year here. Then moving to the trade deadline, they really liked what Dubas did during the offseason and at the trade deadline, and they wanted to bring him back. Dubas said that he didn't want to be distracted by the contract negotiations, so he had his agent basically discuss with Shanahan and, kind of get a feel of what that contract might actually look like. Then we can fast forward to the end of the season where, of course, the Leafs lose in the playoffs there. Shanahan still wants to keep Dubas at this point, and then that Kyle Dubas press conference happens where he's very open, very honest, and saying how he's not sure what he wants to do and he needs to talk to his family. I like that honesty a lot, although it did make me slightly nervous, and I guess Shanahan was also nervous from that as well. Although we do need to go back a little bit in the timeline, because apparently Shanahan and Dubas already had this conversation privately, talking about Dubas's concerns and, everything about his family and all of that. So I don't know why this kind of surprised Shanahan here, or at least why it made him reconsider. But going back to our timeline, on Thursday morning, Shanahan received an offer from Kyle Dubas's agent. Now, apparently it was a lot more than what was expected. The rumors are saying that it was around the $4 to $5 million range is what was expected the offer to be, but apparently it came around $7 million. So obviously a lot more there, but Shanahan did say that money was not an issue. Then we can go to Thursday evening there, where Dubas did send another email to Shanahan saying that, yes, I would like to come back as the GM for the Maple Leafs. He stated that he wanted to do so, but of course we know yesterday Shanahan slept on all that information and went to Kyle Dubas and decided, that they were not going to go with him. So that is the timeline. Now, to me personally, I am kind of confused on why that Kyle Dubas press conference changed Shanahan's mind so much, because if it was new information, that's a completely different story. I understand that a lot more. You have a guy who's uncertain, you're not really quite too sure what he wants to do, and you don't really want to give him a lot of time because you need to still find a new GM if he decides to go the other way. That makes a ton of sense. But at least from what I understood from Shanahan's press conference, and maybe I misheard it, that is a possibility, but it seems like they had a very similar conversation, if not the exact same. It's possible it was expressed a little bit differently in the press conference than it was in those conversations that they had before, but still, the fact that they gave him basically less than a week to fully decide is very, very strange, and it's weird that they would fire him that way, and it does really feel like a firing and not like a parting ways, which is why I put that in quotations at the start, because, Shanahan said that he wanted him back, Dubas said that he wanted to come back, and then Shanahan rescinded that, so it feels like more of a firing than anything else. It's just very shocking how all of this played out, and apparently it was shocking to some in the Leafs organization as well. Some staff members are not very happy about how all of this transpired. Jason Spezza leaving as well because Kyle Dubas is now gone, so that is very unfortunate. I'm pretty upset about that, to be completely honest. But the way this was conducted is just slightly worrying to me. I am kind of surprised that Brendan Shanahan still has a job at this point. I talked about this in my previous video, well, the video that I did where I talked about the Leafs losing in the second round there. I was kind of impartial on whether or not Shanahan would stay or go at that point. I was kind of just iffy about it. But the more and more that I think about it and seeing how the situation played out, I do kind of want him gone, honestly. He has been here long enough. He's fired a lot of general managers, or at least, he's had a lot of general managers in his time, I guess I should say, because technically, I think Lou Lamoriello just walked and Kyle Dubas also walked as well, technically, if you're thinking about it. Although at this point, it doesn't really seem like he's going to get fired. It seems like he's going to get another chance to hire another GM, which we'll see how well that goes and everything like that. But yeah, I just don't love how the situation played out. All that aside, though, basically taking the drama out of the situation and thinking of it as like them actually parting ways, Dubas not wanting to be with the Leafs, thinking about it in that light, how do I feel? Honestly, I love it and I hate it at the same time. One of the reasons why I hate Kyle Dubas being gone is because of how good the Leafs were when he was the GM. Now, albeit it was just during the regular season, obviously didn't really happen in the playoffs, but take a look at this tweet from Scott Wheeler. In Kyle Dubas' 5 seasons as the Leafs GM, they averaged 106 points. Before he took over, their points record was 105. He was the assistant general manager of that team too. He's basically assembled some of the best Leaf teams in their history. Now, yes, it's not translated to playoff success, and that is something that you do need to factor in as well. But still, looking at just that tweet there, it's pretty amazing how well this team has done during the regular season. I genuinely think that he is a good general manager. Now, I don't think he's a great general manager. He's made some mistakes. He has some issues, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later on here. But overall, I think most of his trades are pretty good. His draft picks pretty good as well. The signings, that is where he's had some issues, and that's where I think, maybe is his biggest flaw. But, overall, I feel like he is a good general manager. He's also just a great person. I feel like there's plenty of stories you could tell here, but the one that always stands out in my mind is the Ilya Mikheyev story. Now, if you guys either don't remember it or maybe you guys don't know it, the Leafs were playing in New Jersey. This was obviously a couple of years ago when Mikheyev was still on the Leafs, but there was a play where Ilya Mikheyev's wrist accidentally got cut by a skate, and it was pretty bad. He had to stay in a New Jersey hospital for quite a number of days, even past the time where the Leafs were still in New Jersey. They had already moved on at that point. I forget if they moved on to another city or if they just went home. I forget exactly what it was, but instead of Kyle Dubas going with the team, he stayed with Ilya Mikheyev in that hospital, making sure that he was okay. And I think that is just fantastic. You basically never see that, so I really like that a lot. Dubas is also super passionate about this team. You saw that during the playoffs where he was like throwing his water bottle when the Leafs were losing, screaming that was in at the Riley non-goal, and I do love all of that. It really makes it feel like he loves this team as much as I do, which is a good thing and a bad thing. You can kind of take a look at it both ways. Like, you want to see that passion from your general manager. You like to see that, or at least I do personally, but also at the same time, it could also cloud his judgment a little bit, so I kind of get the argument from both sides there. But looking at the other side, why it might be a good thing that Kyle Dubas is no longer with the Leafs. First of all, Dubas absolutely loved his guys. He was loyal to them, and almost to a fault as well. The players got way too comfortable. It's like that they didn't have to care if they got traded or not, because it just wasn't going to happen. I mean, it did kind of seem like this offseason that might have changed if Kyle Dubas did come back. He was kind of talking about it a little bit in his press conference, and it seemed like he was open to the idea, but with the rest of his tenure as the Leafs GM, that wasn't really a question. It just wasn't going to happen. He did have that famous line, we can and we will, regarding the top four, and it felt like he was just never going to trade him, and obviously, as we know now, he never did. And another positive outlook to this as well is hopefully that new general manager is a lot tougher during those contract negotiations. It does kind of feel like with the Matthews and the Marner and the Nylander contracts that Kyle Dubas got walked all over, to be completely honest. Like, he did not win those contract negotiations whatsoever, so hopefully the new general manager is a little bit better in that aspect. But if we do want to talk about how Dubas did as the general manager, we can take a look at some of his trades and signings. Now, obviously, I don't have every single one of his trades and signings here. These, honestly, are all just off the top of my head, so, there's obviously other trades and other stuff that I probably forgot about that are really, really bad trades that you could probably put in this list as well, or maybe some good trades that you can also put in this list. I didn't want to go super in-depth with this. I wanted it to be more of a general overview. Now, if we are going to be taking a look at some trades that he did, I want to take a look at Kyle Dubas' worst trade as the Leafs general manager, and I don't think I'll get too much pushback on this, but I think his worst trade was the Nazem Kadri deal. The trade was Nazem Kadri and Calle Rosen going to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Tyson Barrie, who just did not work out with the Leafs. He wasn't what the Leafs needed, to be completely honest. They needed more of a defensive defenseman instead of that offensive defenseman, so that didn't work out. And then you also had Alexander Kerfoot in that deal, and it's Kerfoot. I don't really think I need to say too much about that. It's Alexander Kerfoot. That trade was just not good whatsoever. Now, even though I do think that this is his worst trade, I understood it at the time, and I still understand it now, to be completely honest, because with Nazem Kadri, he was suspended in back-to-back playoff series, and both times he kind of cost the Leafs the series, or at least, he really hurt the Leafs in those series, because losing him was a huge part of the Leafs roster at that point. And in his first season with the Colorado Avalanche, he also got suspended in the playoffs. So 3 years in a row, 3 playoffs in a row, he got suspended, which is pretty crazy. Now, obviously, that Stanley Cup run that he had last year kind of makes up for it. Like, he played very well in that Stanley Cup run, so definitely makes up for that aspect. But still, I understood it at the time. I get that trade for sure. We can also talk about the Nick Foligno trade, which also looks really bad in hindsight, just because Foligno did get injured and they traded away a first-round draft pick and some other stuff as well. I don't have the full details, but, I have a hard time kind of blaming Dubas there because he got injured, so it's not really his fault. But also at the same time, if that happens, it does kind of fall on the general manager, whether you think it's fair or not. The Matt Murray trade this past offseason, that is a confusing one, and you can blame Dubas there because, yes, Matt Murray did get injured, but we kind of knew that was going to happen, or at least it was very likely considering his injury history, and also on top of that as well, it's a pretty big cap hit for a team that's kind of cap strapped. So that trade, I just don't really understand a whole lot. I also didn't like the Jared McCann trade because they brought him in just so they could protect Justin Hall in the expansion draft, and so Seattle would take Jared McCann, and that doesn't look very good now at this point. I would much rather Jared McCann on my team than Justin Hall, but I do think he's made some very good trades as well. I would say Jack Campbell was one of them, and also a lot of the guys at this trade deadline here, picking up Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Achari, picking up Jake McCabe and Sam Lafferty, Luke Shen, like all of those guys I thought were very good trades for the Maple Leafs. Yes, in the end, it doesn't really matter too much because they only made it to the second round, so it's not like it affects a ton, but I do still think that those were good trades, and he's also done some other good trades as well. Like I said, I just don't want to go too in-depth in this section right here. I also feel like he's done a good job at signing those guys in the bottom half of his lineup, like a Kelly Yarncroke and a Mark Giordano and a Jason Spezza, like those guys, bringing him in for the cost that, he kind of signed him for. I feel like he's done a very good job there. The signing of the big guys, though, that is where his biggest issues kind of lie. That is where you can see he made some mistakes. Now, I do kind of understand it a little bit because he was still a new general manager by the time that he had to sign all 4 of these guys. So he became the Leafs general manager on May 11th, 2018, and the final guy that he had to sign was Mitch Marner, and that was on September 13th, 2019. So a very short window there where you have to sign all of these big players where you're still kind of getting used to becoming a general manager. But still, you can find an issue with almost every single one of these contracts. With Austin Matthews, he only gets a 5-year deal at $11.6 million a season. I don't mind that cap hit, but only having 5 years there, and the fact that it walks him to unrestricted free agency as well, that is just not a good look. You need to do a better job at that there. With Mitch Marner, he got a 6-year, $10.9 million a year contract. For me, I want that cap hit to be just a little bit lower. It doesn't need to be crazy, like maybe even a 9.9 I would be a little bit more happy with, or a couple of more years, to be honest. And for William Nylander, he signed for 6 years at $6.9 million a season. That one I was okay with because, first of all, nice, and second of all, that is a good contract for the player that William Nylander is. It's the best deal out of the top 4. The issue with that contract, though, was how long it actually took to get signed. That contract didn't get done until December 1st, 2018, so it was literally the last minute that you could sign William Nylander, and they just got it done in time, and that took them way too long, and that hurt William Nylander's season actually quite a bit. He was not very good that year because he missed basically 2 months of the season and also the training camp. Like, he just didn't have his legs under him. He just couldn't really get up to speed, and he did not have a very good year. Although I do believe that Kyle Dubas did come out eventually and say that he made a mistake waiting so long on that deal, so at least he admitted it. But yeah, not a very good move there, at least taking so long to sign that contract. Otherwise, I do think Nylander's contract is good. And then we get to the John Tavares contract. This is where I feel like some people might disagree with me. So he gets signed for 7 years at $11 million a season. I think some people might say that that was a mistake. I don't think that the Leafs see it as that. I think the Leafs have and are still getting exactly what they wanted to out of John Tavares. He is basically a point per game player every single season that he's played in the NHL. He has that captain material. He scored the game-winning goal to send you to the second round for the first time in 19 years. I think the Leafs got exactly what they were expecting out of him. That all being said, though, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. I would maybe just say it could have been a misstep, which is maybe the nicer way of saying a mistake, but that's the way that I want to phrase it, is maybe it was more of a misstep, because did they really need John Tavares? They already had Nazem Kadri at that point, so then that Nazem Kadri trade probably wouldn't happen if they didn't get John Tavares, and then they would have $11 million free on their cap that they could have got a defensive defenseman, which is probably what they needed at the time. Like, yes, bringing in John Tavares was a huge thing, and I definitely think it helped the Leafs center depth for a long time there, but at the same time, would they have been better off just getting a defenseman? I mean, we'll never know at this point, so that's why I kind of phrase it more as a misstep, because maybe it wouldn't have helped the Leafs if they didn't sign John Tavares and they got a defenseman. Maybe they would be in the exact same position. We don't really know, but I definitely understand why some people might say that it was a mistake, but I have a hard time really phrasing it as that. Overall, I do think that Kyle Dubas did do a good job at being the general manager for the Maple Leafs, and if he wants to have another general manager job, I'm sure he could find one pretty easily. Okay, but what about the future for the Maple Leafs? This is what makes me a little bit nervous, just because of how much needs to be done during this offseason. It's one reason why I thought Dubas would be back, but they have a lot of restricted and unrestricted free agents that they need to sign to fill out that roster. They also need to sign Austin Matthews before the season starts. You can't have that going into the season. You also need to decide if you want to trade Mitch Marner, because if you are going to trade one of those top four there, and I feel like almost everybody wants you to trade one of the top four, but with Austin Matthews, that's not happening. You're not trading that guy. You're just not. John Tavares, you can't. Like, legitimately, he has a no movement clause, and it doesn't look like he's going to waive it anytime soon. Like, that's just, he wants to be in Toronto, and that's completely fair. I don't blame him. With Mitch Marner, he does have a no movement clause that kicks in on July 1st. So if you do want to trade him, you have to do it before then. And with William Nylander, it just doesn't make you better, at least in my opinion. I feel like it just would be a lateral move if you trade Nylander. He only does have 1 year left in his deal, so maybe his next contract isn't as team friendly. So maybe in the long run, it is a smarter move, but I feel like the biggest issue for the Leafs right now is the fact that they have 3 guys locked up at $11 million a season that are all on their forward group. I think that is their biggest issue. So if they do want to get that kind of figured out and get that worked out, they need to hurry up and sign a general manager, or at least have their interim GM trade Mitch Marner, because that is the only guy that I really see going out of the guys that make $11 million a season. As for the coaching, I do still assume that Sheldon Keefe is going to be fired at some point this offseason. I think that the Leafs are waiting until the new general manager comes in, which I think is completely fine. I don't have an issue with that, because if I was the new general manager, that is what I would want. I would want to be able to come in, evaluate the coach, and, explore any other options if I wanted to, and I do think that is where it's heading. I think that Sheldon Keefe is gone before the next season starts. As for who the new general manager is going to be, I'll be honest, I'm not really quite too sure. I think Brandon Prudhomme is an option. He's been with the Leafs organization for a little while, and he's basically been the main reason that the Leafs have been cap compliant over the past couple of years, so I think that could be a good option. I know that the Calgary Flames have expressed interest in him as well, and if you want to keep him, you probably should just promote him to the general manager. I feel like that would help out a lot. Another name that I've heard thrown around a lot is Eric Tulsky. Now, I don't know too much about him other than the fact that he's the assistant general manager for the Carolina Hurricanes right now, so that is a good thing to me. If you're the assistant general manager for the Hurricanes, who are a pretty good team, that's good in my book. So if it's one of those two guys, I'd be completely okay with. But the thing that scares me is this tweet from Dom Lesuzen, and I mispronounced that. I apologize to Dom. And also, I believe it comes from a Chris Johnston article. The picture says, "Let it be said here that Brad Shiliving is now the favorite to replace him as Leafs GM because there are so few obvious options who meet Shanahan's requirement that having an experienced general manager would be an attractive quality. The others that fall into that category are Mark Bergevin, Peter Chiarelli, Chuck Fletcher, Ray Shero, Ron Hextall, Jim Benning, and Dave Notice." Ugh, I hate that. I hate that list. I sure hope that it's none of those guys, because if it is, I would be very, very upset. I know that Shanahan said that he would like an experienced general manager, but if you're taking a look at those guys, I don't really understand it whatsoever. So I am very nervous about the future of this team. It's going to be a super interesting offseason. That is for sure, but I would love to know what you guys think about this move. Do you guys agree with them letting go of Kyle Dubas? Yes or no? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure to follow me on my Instagram, my Twitter, and my TikTok. Links are all in the description down below. But like I said, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.